Welcome to Module 5 of IT Project Management. In this module, we will continue our investigation of how a project becomes a project. And we will end with a discussion of the document that gets a project officially started and that makes you officially the manager of that project, the project charter. This module focuses on tracing the theoretical, strategic business case on its way to becoming a real-life project in an organization's portfolio. We will take another look at the project and the product life cycles, so we're very clear about the difference between both and about how both fit into the 5 phases of successful project management. Then we will look at the most important document in a project itself, the project charter. You will learn what it is and does, and why you need a project charter in order to become the official manager of your project. Then we will look in depth at all the components of a project charter and find out what they should be, especially when considering scope management, which always presents the biggest challenge, along with ensuring that everyone knows exactly what their role is in and outside the project team. Those roles are defined in the RACI chart. So far, we have discussed the 5 phases of project management: initiation and/or definition, planning, execution, and closing, with monitoring and controlling accompanying them all throughout the project. That is the project life cycle. The product life cycle lives in the gray phases here, namely in planning and executing. This is where, depending on the nature of the project, you get to negotiate with the project sponsor which development lifecycle to use, whether waterfall, where all project activities run in one sequence and deliver the full product in one piece at the end, or agile, where the product is delivered in parts, but each part is a functional module that can be deployed. Now, that is the product lifecycle. If you are building software, this is called the SDLC, or software development lifecycle. Along with simple product development come all the other important deliverables like manuals, marketing materials, processes and checklists, metrics, and so on. We cannot forget about those because remember, the value of a project lies in the user actually using the product you're delivering. And along all of this, we're managing not just the project scope, schedule, and budget, but also risk, quality, and resources, and then all the people, all the stakeholders, and their expectations. We've got our hands full, and we need rules. In this module, we're spending some more time in the initiation or definition phase. Why? Because as you've already seen, projects need a strong framework and a strong plan for the outcome to be successful. And everyone involved needs to understand the rules for the project. So where better to establish this framework than at the very beginning, in the initiation phase? And that's where the project charter comes in. In one of our previous modules, we talked about the business case. The business case happens long before the project is actually established, but it already summarizes the project framework and describes the benefits of the project to the organization. In fact, the business case contains many points that will later be folded into the project charter. And while the business case answers the question, why should the organization undertake this project? The project charter spells out how the project will use the invested funds to generate value for the business. Look at the green box here. These are the parts of a project charter. More about that in a bit. But let's step back for a moment. Every project is different. Different schedules, different products, and different people are involved. And on any given project, the various stakeholders may have differing ideas about what the project is about. Your job as project manager is to make sure that everyone involved understands the project and agrees what success looks like. Clarifying the rules of the game for a new project is exactly what skilled managers need to do. All project management activities flow from and depend on these rules, which is why there must be general acceptance of the project rules before the project begins. All the stakeholders, project team, management, and customer, must agree on the goals and guidelines of the project. Without these documented agreements, project goals and constraints may change every day. So agreement on the goals. Getting agreement on the project rules is really easy. This is because the views of all the stakeholders must be heard and considered. This give and take may be so time consuming that some may push for moving on and getting to the real work. But consider this. If the stakeholders can't come to an agreement on the basic parameters of the project before the work begins, there is even less of a chance that they will agree after the money begins to be spent. The time to resolve different assumptions and expectations is during this initial period, before the pressure is turned up. One of the definitions of a successful project is that it meets stakeholder expectations. It's the job of the project manager to manage these expectations, and this job begins by writing them down and getting agreement. Project rules document stakeholders' expectations. Project rules also set up a means by which the project may be changed in midstream if necessary. This change control stipulates that the same stakeholders who agreed to the original rules must approve any change in the rules. The possibility of changes emphasizes once again the necessity of having everything down on paper before the project begins. With this material in hand, you will be well equipped to detail any effects that the changes might have on cost, scope, or schedule in an ongoing project. Controlled scope. Because each project is different, each is an unknown quantity when it is started. This uniqueness adds to the challenge and fun of projects, but it can also lead to dramatic overruns in budgets and schedules. A careful writing of the project rules is key in keeping the project team focused on the work they should be doing and how they can be productive. Management support. It is a rare project manager who has sufficient authority to impose their will on other stakeholders. This is why a sponsor from senior management is a crucial factor in the success of a project. We will discuss how this management support may be written into the project rules. And there is one key document to ensure that everyone understands and agrees to the project rules. That is the project charter, which describes the goals, constraints, and assumptions that set the overall vision and framework for the project. In the last session, we talked about the business case or the statement of work that defined the measurable organizational value for a project, which is then codified and formalized in the project charter. This leads us to a detailed scope description, namely the scope statement, which is derived from the in-scope and out-of-scope description that is contained in the project charter. This scope statement leads us to project requirements, technical requirements, use cases, user stories, all of those things, depending on the project methodology that is in use at the organization. Once we have the scope statement and the project requirements, we can think about how to develop the schedule for the project, and that includes selecting the appropriate project structure, which can be waterfall for smaller projects, which can be any kind of iterative formats for larger projects, from a SCRUM format to a Kanban format to anything in between, any hybrid waterfall iterative format as well, depending on organizational preferences. In order to develop these phases and include tasks into these phases to end up with an actual project schedule, we're going to have to define what these tasks are, then sequence these tasks, identify resources who are going to execute on these tasks, and then develop time estimates based on the resources skill set and their availability that will allow us to come up with a good schedule, and that will allow us from the schedule then to develop the project budget. Once we are done with both schedule and budget, we are going to start off the project execution phase, because we are ready to start tracking to the schedule and the budget once they have been approved by, you guessed it, the project sponsor. And this is where you, the project manager, come in, because the project charter is the expectation setting contract between the organization and you that specifies that under your leadership, the project is going to deliver the identified scope within the stated budget and within the stated schedule to create the measurable organization value that supports the organizational strategy and its stakeholders. Now, the PMBOK defines the project charter as a document that formally authorizes the existence of a project and provides the project manager with the authority to apply organizational resources to project activities. In other words, no project charter, no project. No project charter, no project manager. This is very important to know because I have seen in many organizations a project manager leading a project without a project charter. This almost always leads to project failure. And here is why working without a project charter will lead to project failure. Because a project charter defines the project start and the project boundaries. It creates the formal record for the project, and it is a direct way for senior management to formally accept and to commit to the project. Now, if you think back to our first module in which we looked at all the reasons projects fail, one of the major reasons projects have failed in the past is because senior management has not shown an investment into the project. This can be remedied by the project charter being signed by the project sponsor, who typically is a member of senior management. Please pause the video at this point and review the parts of a good project charter that is shown at the bottom half of the slide. It seems that all the questions that we've seen in the bottom half of the previous slide could really be answered much better by the project manager, but who really owns the project charter? Who really owns the project charter is the project sponsor, because the project sponsor authorizes the project charter and thereby gives the authority to the project manager to spend the budget that has been allocated in the project charter and to complete the project within the specified time frame. And while the project manager may have done all the legwork for the project charter, including conversations, budget what-ifs, schedule what-ifs, that is different schedule scenarios, really the final approval and the responsibility for the project charter and for the project in itself stays with the project sponsor. Let's talk about how the roles are distributed among Agile and Waterfall projects. We'll start with the Scrum Master. The Scrum Master does not manage the Agile team. The Scrum Master instead supports the product owner with a whole lot of administrative tasks, such as leading sprint planning, leading the Scrum meeting, that daily stand-up, making sure that all the progress is correctly reported, and specifically that the team stays motivated and stays on task. However, the Scrum Master has really no decision authority over anything inside the project. That decision authority falls to the product owner. The product owner really owns the project. She defines the scope, she defines the use cases, she prioritizes the features that sit in the backlog, and that also means that she really is in charge of schedule and budget, and that she makes all the project-based decisions. And lastly, she also provides feedback, frequent feedback. She may even have her desk in the development area in which the development team is working, and she approves any and all of the results. Sometimes large Agile projects have a project manager. A project manager, however, is a default in a waterfall project. That's why this role is in the middle here. The project manager in a waterfall project defines the project scope, gathers the requirements, prioritizes the features, and does a lot of the functions that in an Agile context the product owner does.
The project manager also makes project-based decisions, estimates and manages the schedule and the budget, identifies resources, and manages the team, in other words. Those are a lot of roles that the Scrum Master does not occupy. The project sponsor in a waterfall context owns the waterfall project. The project sponsor is responsible for approving everything, and in that, the project sponsor is partly akin to the product owner. The project sponsor approves the schedule, scope, budget, and any changes to that. In fact, the project sponsor, just like the product owner in an agile context, own the project charter, as we've seen. The project sponsor, however, is much more hands-off. He or she will only step in if requested by the project manager or if there is a real need or an emergency. But again, the project sponsor is at the top of the food chain and approves all the results in a waterfall project.
Project charters come in all shapes and sizes. For larger projects, they tend to be bigger, almost small books. For smaller projects, they are shorter. In our course, we're going to work with a template that you're going to see in the next few slides. Here we're looking at the upper third of this template, and in the upper part, we're seeing the project governance information that starts with the project name, the SOW number, that's the statement of work number, the client name, the sponsor information, program manager, portfolio manager, project management team, and PMO support. This is very important because it lists all the entities and all the stakeholders that are involved in the decision-making process about project funding, change requests, and other high-level administrative considerations. Below that governance information is probably the most important part of the project charter, namely the authorized by section. The authorized by section has to carry the project sponsor's signature. If this authorized by section does not carry the project sponsor's signature, guess what? You don't have a project and you are not a project manager. A project must have a charter in order to be a project, in order to be authorized by the project sponsor to spend the funding that is allocated to the project. Only an authorized project charter, that is a project charter that is authorized by the project sponsor, confirms the start of a project and the authorization to the project manager to begin work. Below the authorization line, including the signatures and the date, are the project description, that is a short description of what the project is going to do, and then right next to it, the business case, typically in 1 or 2 sentences, sometimes 3, in order to remind us why the project was selected in the first place and what the basic value proposition is of this project for the organization. Before we go into depth about managing scope, let's take a look at this list. The project here is for rolling out a training course. And here's a list of all the things that need to happen to make the project successful. Note how all the activities start out with verbs like provide or purchase or acquire. You're also seeing here that the scope is not just about pulling the training resources together and getting instructors certified, but also about teaching it. It's about preparing and delivering the training. That had to be stated explicitly because some projects are all about building and handing over, and some projects, like this one here, go from development to direct use of the product. In the top row, right under the title, it says the project will. This means that we're looking at the list of the things that are in scope. In scope means that these are the items we are going to deliver. At the bottom here, we're looking at the things the project will not do. For example, we're not going to standardize the entire project management process across the company. The company itself will have to do that. We're just teaching them how to. We're also not going to recruit trainers they'll have to do that. All of these items are called out of scope. Why is this important? Remember that a project has a schedule and a budget. We simply can't pay for more work than we have money for. And an engineering and development team is not a bottomless bag into which you can stuff more work and expect that it gets done in the original timeline. That's why we must specify in scope and out of scope very carefully and make sure it is understood and supported by all the stakeholders. In a project charter form like the one we're walking through currently, you're seeing the in-scope and out-of-scope sections on the left side. They are arranged in a table format, but the idea that we are describing in one of the lists what our project is going to deliver, that is what is in scope, and in another list what our project is not going to deliver, that is what is out of scope, is the same. The important thing is you always want to have both sides, just in case a stakeholder asks you sometime down the road to deliver something that is not expressly contained in your in-scope section, but that is enough extra work that you'll need more money and time for it. That's when looking at the project charter again and seeing that what they're asking for is contained in the out-of-scope section can be a lifesaver. The two columns on the right side give us our success metrics. In the goals and objectives column, we define what project success looks like. That is, what kind of value are we going to deliver with our project? On the right side, we are specifying what we are going to measure and what our number targets are, so that we can prove that our project has generated value and is successful. Note that each goal has at least one measurement aligned with it. These measurements start with verbs like increase or reduce and are followed by number targets. These number targets are very important because we want to know what the goal is. If you were going to just write reduce, even a 0.1% reduction could satisfy the goal if you really wanted to argue your case. But would that mean success? Hardly, and certainly not to all stakeholders. That's why it's so important to have the numbers here. The bottom third of our project charter consists of 4 important fields. Those are the assumptions and constraints, the risks, the budget, team, and preliminary schedule. The assumptions and constraints for a project are really a definition of the environment and the givens in the environment in which the project is being developed. Assumptions and constraints means these are the things that we can expect as project managers to be ready for us as we bring the team in and as we perform our work. Or constraints are the things that we can expect to be limiting us in the kind of work that we can do or in the ways that we can do our work. Risks, of course, are the things that could potentially go wrong in the project. And as we identify initially the risks at the outset of the project, we want to make sure to keep a good eye on these risks and constantly ask ourselves what else could potentially happen and perform what is called continuous risk identification throughout the project. Continuous risk identification occurs throughout the entire project cycle. It starts even before the project charter in the business case formation. And so the risks that you will be seeing in the project charter partially come from the business case even. Below the assumptions and constraints, you're seeing the allocated budget. This budget is in many cases a 50-50 budget, meaning that you have the option of with appropriate change requests go above and beyond that budget as the project progresses without any kind of penalty. And below the budget, you will see the intended team for the project. Now, this team may materialize. Typically, these people are already assigned to your team as the project manager when you receive this charter. Or this team may be still in formation, or this team may also slightly change. Then on the bottom right side of the screen, we have the preliminary schedule. The preliminary schedule typically outlines the major milestones in the project schedule. Here we're seeing, for example, charter approval. We're seeing a design completion. We're seeing implementation complete and approved. We're seeing gate reviews here, which is project phase end reviews and approvals by, you guessed it, the project sponsor. And then finally, project closure. So these dates also are, I don't want to say approximate. You should hit those dates, especially if they're at the end of a month, as you're seeing here for the preliminary schedule, January 31st, 2014. However, these can also be extended based on what happens during the project progress. But any information that you're seeing in this project charter, and that includes any scope information, any target information, any assumptions and constraints, risks, budget specifically, and schedule specifically, require really a change request. And this is the project change management knowledge area that we have discussed earlier. A charter answers many questions about the project, including the purpose, scope, deliverables, and chain of command. There is, however, a need for another document that precisely details the responsibilities of each group involved in a project. It is known variously as a Responsibility Assignment Matrix, or RAM, RACI, which is a Responsible, Accountable, Consulted, and Informed chart, or simply a Responsibility Matrix. The importance of this document is growing as companies re-engineer themselves and form partnerships and virtual companies. In these kinds of environments, many groups that otherwise might have nothing to do with each other are brought together to work on projects. In a RACI chart, R stands for responsible. These are the people doing the work and making sure it has the right outcomes. A stands for accountable. These are the people who approve the work and will take the blame if it was the wrong thing. C stands for consult. These are the people who will advise how the work could or should be done, but they will not directly work with the project. And I stands for inform. These are the people who will receive your status updates. Let's dive a little bit deeper into this.
A RACI matrix is a simple, effective way to define and document project roles and responsibilities. Using one will significantly improve your chances of project success. The acronym RACI stands for the 4 roles that stakeholders might play in any project. The people who do the work are responsible. This includes anyone who must complete a task or make a decision. Several people can be jointly responsible. The person who must sign off or approve when the task, objective, or decision is complete is accountable. Only one person can be accountable, which means that the buck stops there. Anyone who needs to give input before the work can be done and signed off on is consulted. These are active participants who are in the loop. Anyone who needs upgrades on progress or decisions is informed. These are people who don't need to be formally consulted, nor do they contribute directly to the task or decision. To create a RACI matrix, you first identify all the tasks involved in delivering the project and list them on the left-hand side of the chart in the order they need to be completed. Next, identify all the project stakeholders and list them along the top of the chart. Then fill in the cells of the model, identifying who is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. The final step in creating your RACI matrix is to share it with your stakeholders, resolve any conflicts or ambiguities, and get agreement. For each stakeholder, ask these 3 questions. Does one stakeholder have too much of the project assigned to them? Does the stakeholder need to be involved in so many of the activities? Can responsible be changed to consulted, or consulted changed to informed? Does each stakeholder totally agree with the role that they are specified to play? When such agreement is achieved, that should be included in the project's charter and documentation. For each task, look at these 7 red flags. At least one person needs to be doing the work in each step. Having too many people doing the work for each step can slow progress. There must be one person accountable for every step of the project. The buck stops with this person. Having multiple people accountable for a step invites slow and contentious decision-making. Look carefully. Do all the stakeholders involved in each step really need to be involved? Are there justifiable benefits for involving them? Too many C's really slows down a project. Do all stakeholders need to be routinely consulted, or can they be kept informed? Determining whether all stakeholders are included can be challenging because it is an error of omission. This is often best addressed by a steering committee or a management team. Taking the time to do this analysis delivers the real benefit of the RACI model. It will expose problems with the structure of the project management process before they derail your project.
In this module, we trace the theoretical, strategic business case on its way to becoming a real-life project in an organization's portfolio. We took another look at the project and the product life cycles to clarify the difference between both and to remind ourselves how both fit into the 5 phases of successful project management. Then we investigated the most important document in a project itself, the project charter. You learned what it is and does, and why you need a project charter in order to become the official manager of your project. Then we studied in depth the components of a project charter and paid special attention to scope management. Lastly, we learned that project roles and responsibilities are defined in the RACI chart. Thanks for watching. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.